in a physical way.
Wrong.
I don't think that's wrong.
Read a book.
I mean, just saying.
Every single instance.
Just saying, five guys are running around with guns in some small scale incursion. That's not fucking civil war.
And say it was civil war.
Well, that's what we're talking about, is civil unrest and civil war.
And what precipitates that is social.
MAGA right-winger Tim Pool got destroyed on his own show by a fellow conservative named Andrew Wilson over Tim Pool's obsession with the idea of an impending civil war. We're going to take a look at clips from Tim Pool's show. I will share my thoughts as well. Let's check this out together.
So that was neat to see Texas finally do something about their own border and ignore kind of some federal mandates that were going on. But ultimately, again, I got to disagree with you. Here's what I'll put this on record now, because it's not that far away. And we can look back on this broadcast later. Come November, chances are good Trump gets in. I mean, not Trump, Biden gets in, and Trump supporters don't really do anything. He concedes. And that's probably how it's going to go.
Again, I think you live in a movie. I think you think doing something is a guy standing up and saying, I hereby declare, instead of 7 guys going out and being like, hey, can we make sure that any of those trucks coming in don't have the illegals? Because we've had a couple trucks come through here that did, and they've been transporting them. Now, I tried calling ICE, but they won't answer. So Jim and I are going to go out.
Don't consider that a civil war. That would be low-scale vigilanteism.
So, right. And what precipitates civil war?
It would have to be some large segment of the population, that 5% or higher, who are doing some type of sedition or considerable treason, what would be considered considerable treason to the United States government. That would be, that is what I would consider to be some type of actionable civil warfare.
Just 5%?
Yeah, 10%.
What is it, 60%? 60%? No, it's like 70% of the Republicans think that the Democrats have already committed sedition.
Yeah, I'm sure that they do.
Right,
but
so
they're not acting in a way as though they have.
I think
that's the problem, right? If you think that somebody has truly acted in a way as to be a traitor, right? What do you do to traitors?
Sedition and treason are two different things.
Yeah, I know. But if you were to say that you think a person's acting in such a way that they're a traitor, what do you do to traitors? Last I checked, they get hung, right?
But treason and sedition are not the same thing.
Yeah, I know. But the point of my hypothetical is to say they're not acting in such a way as though these people, while they say you're seditious or they say you're treasonous, whichever one, they're not acting as though they are. They might say it, but they're not acting like it.
What does that mean, they're not acting like it?
Well, if somebody is guilty of sedition, that's firing squad. If they're guilty of treason, they get hung.
Sedition is not.
They don't get worked with.
Sedition is like maximum 10 years in prison, I believe.
Okay, fine. Well, they're not getting 10 years in prison either. But
well, that's the question of whether Donald Trump gets elected. The issue is conservatives overwhelmingly they're not revolutionaries. The question is, do we expect, with everything that's already happened, we're at the point now where since the beginning of this conversation with Donald Trump, they've accused the president of being a traitor. They've accused Donald Trump of being a traitor.
That's true.
They have acted as though he is a traitor. They cemented his feet so that he couldn't run his administration. They effectively levied legal war against him during his entire administration.
But you need a percentage of the American public who's acting in accordance with that against the system.
No.
In a physical way.
Wrong.
I don't think that's wrong.
Read a book.
I mean, just saying.
Every single instance.
Just saying, 5 guys are running around with guns in some small scale incursion. That's not fucking civil war.
And say it was civil war.
Well, that's what we're talking about, is civil unrest and civil war.
And what precipitates that is social breakdown when people lose confidence in their government.
I agree. That's what precipitates it. That's true. You have social breakdown. You have social cohesion breaking down.
You're sitting here going,
but that doesn't mean that that's what it is. And you can also, you know what else you can get? Instead of civil war, you can get... instead of revolution, instead of civil war, you can have a renaissance too. Sometimes social breakdowns lead to renaissance. You forget about that as well.
Well, usually you get a revolution or you get a civil war. Civil wars will end with one power structure typically takes over. The outright destruction is rare. Someone always asserts authority. But you get a revolution when no one fights, or you get a civil war when someone decides to fight back. What we could experience is a communist revolution in the United States.
You could.
If the right does nothing. We are facing an election where we already know from 2020 no one will agree on the results. To then say, after this election, everything will be fine, I believe is absurdity.
Okay, so
there's a difference, Tim Pool, in everything being fine and there being a civil war. I mean, there's so much stupid that Tim Pool says here. Okay, first of all, the right wingers are obsessed that this idea that the Democrats are communists. I mean, just the standard establishment Democratic Party politicians are communists. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and, Barack Obama is no longer in office, but they called him a communist. These are not communists. These are not socialists. These are pretty much center to center right politicians. In any place else, industrialized country in the world, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are considered conservatives. So first of all, there's not going to be some communist uprising. And we kind of think that we live in this unique period. Probably everyone thinks whatever time they're living in is unique. But is there more turmoil and unrest in the United States right now than there was in the 1960s when we were having just constant protests on college campuses? I mean, those would have been bigger and more sustained than the protests that we've seen over the last year on college campuses. In the 60s, there wasn't a civil war. The government wasn't overthrown. And the other thing that the right-wingers or left-wingers who think there's going to be a civil war that they really overlook, I think, is the response that the government had to January 6th and the attempted insurrection then. They arrest, a bunch of these people were charged, a bunch of them were put in jail, and guess what happened? That made all of these crazies, these other crazies, scared, I think. That, this was an instance where the court systems actually worked and served as a deterrent to other people who would have tried to commit the same kind of acts later. What did we see when Donald Trump was being taken to court for his various charges? There were people saying, oh, now look at all the MAGA are going to show up in New York City or wherever, and they're not going to allow this to happen, and there's going to be all this unrest. And nobody showed up. Marjorie Taylor Greene with a bullhorn showed up, and a handful of other people. So I think the arrests that happened were enough to scare the people who would have really tried to get a civil war going. And what's going to happen after this election? There might be some pockets of violence, but if Kamala Harris wins, Trump loses, the right-wingers are going to be bummed out, and then they're going to do nothing. They're going to cry and complain and whine, but there's not going to be any mass movement to try to overthrow the government. The same thing with if it goes the other way. If Kamala Harris loses and Donald Trump wins, the communists aren't going to rise up because there aren't, any significant number of communists in the United States. They're not going to rise up and have a civil war. So Tim Pool is a moron.
I agree.
So
I can't believe I'm saying this.
So I'll say this. No, I still have to disagree. This has been going on for years and years, where the American government has prepared for contingencies for civil war. This has been going on forever. And to be honest with you, Tim, you've been talking about the Civil War since long before I even got into online politics. I was listening to you talk about, hey, this is right around the corner. It's coming soon to a theater near you. The stage is set. We're very close to it. And we weren't really that close to it. So the thing is like...
Would you think January 6th wasn't a dramatic escalation of political violence?
I think that you could have a lead up over many years. Over many years.
So I was correct. What did the SPLC accuse me of?
What do you mean? When did you
September,
predict Jan 6?
In September. Oh, I love this because it's in the lawsuits against me too. SPLC's written about it because in September of or it might have been August of 2020, I said, if Donald Trump loses, you're going to see dudes showing up in D.C. They're going to lose their mind and storm the White House or something because they are not going to accept this. You're right. It wasn't the White House. It was the Capitol building. Mm-hmm. And then they wrote Tim Pool had foreknowledge of January 6th, and here's proof because he predicted. No.
January 6th wasn't a civil war. Tim Pool is a fool.
It's because I read. And I said, wow, based on everything these people are saying and preparing for, they're going to go to D.C. and do something like this. And then they did.
Yeah, but I think if you say that the sky is...
Going to D.C. and doing something doesn't mean a civil war. Yes, they tried to overthrow the government. It wasn't a civil war. It didn't lead to a civil war.
falling enough times, just like Alex Jones, eventually a couple of those things are
dude.
correct.
In 2018, when I said escalation of political violence is going to reach a massive tipping point, and then in 2020, they firebombed St. John's Church and the White House grounds, and they took over numerous cities, I predicted that. So to say...
We had, again, I'm going to go back to the 1960s. Tim Pool keeps saying, read a book. Go back to the 1960s. We had civil unrest. We had political violence. We had, bombings and things like that. Still wasn't a civil war. Didn't lead to a civil war.
You've been saying for a long time it's around the corner, and every time you say something's going to happen, it does, but you're still wrong. Dude, I don't care if I'm wrong.
It's not every time you say it that it doesn't happen. What I'm saying is that you've made the prediction so many times. I've heard it so many times on your show. Are we this close? We're this close to civil war. It's right around the corner, ladies and gentlemen. And the real question is, what will happen when the civil war gets here? I haven't seen the Civil War, Tim. I'm going to be honest with you, and it doesn't look to me like the political will is there to do it. Now, January 6th people went quietly into the night, and nobody's really saying much about that either.
So the first thing I'll say academically is, I don't know if you've ever actually read...
Now, I would somewhat disagree with this Andrew Wilson here about the January 6th. I don't know if he's one of these that wants to act like January 6th was a peaceful tour and all of this. It wasn't peaceful, but... Again, what happened with those people is that a bunch of them were arrested and lost their jobs and their livelihoods and they went to prison, and then they cried about it and thought Daddy Trump was going to save them, and he didn't. And the other ones that have the same kind of thinking, who aren't totally nuts, I think have decided, oh, okay, we love Donald Trump and we'll do whatever he wants. But on the other hand, I'm not going to give up my life and my livelihood for a president or a potential president.
History books. Perhaps
a guy like me read? Yes, I've read history books. And
so when you read articles specifically about various historical periods, you realize that we condense it in our history books. And so when we talk about the rise of Hitler, people tend to forget that it's like 20 years through Weimar Germany leading up to this point where this guy rises to power. And so...
The conditions were set for the Weimar Republic. We had massive inflation.
I think you're either being purposefully obtuse or you cannot comprehend basic facts. And the intentional being intentionally obtuse is to say, I recognize that many different academics have predicted civil war, state that we're in civil strife. You said political violence is going to escalate. The Summer of Love did happen. You said in 2020 that a bunch of angry Trump supporters are going to go to D.C. and storm, the White House. It wasn't the White House, it was the Capitol building. You got that one right. And you've been warning about how these things lead to each other. And now today, as of today, because the Civil War didn't kick off at any of those time periods, you've been wrong to predict these things are escalating. The first thing is, when I say, hey, look, here's a guy who said this thing is happening, that's not me predicting it. That's saying a Princeton professor has made this prediction. A former CIA official has made this prediction. Numerous security advisors have made this prediction. Canada is saying it's improbable. So it's not necessarily a prediction, but they're concerned about its potentiality.
Improbable.
Investors are now making this prediction. We are in civil strife. I'm not making that up, nor am I predicting it. I'm saying that's an assessment of leaders in politics, infrastructure, and culture.
Leaders, of some people, not of every. There's no united academia saying this is right around the corner, guys. That's not happening. You pull the sources that you want because they help craft your narrative, Tim.
And then when the Summer of Love happens, I was wrong.
Okay, so again, if you say the sky is falling every single day, eventually you get some keys of it right. But I've been hearing this from you for a long, long, long time. What have you heard from here? Again, I'll repeat it. I have listened to you long before I was ever inside of any type of political commentary. I was listening to you talk about coming civil wars, how this is happening.
What was wrong?
In the next few months, next few months, this could really set the stage between the states and this for a new civil war.
What was wrong? What was wrong?
They just didn't happen.
What didn't happen?
None of these civil wars that you
What civil wars did I predict that didn't happen? What civil wars?
I didn't come in with a list of all the times Tim Pool's predicted civil war, but dude,
okay, you're at the point
famous for it.
You're at the point where you've lost the argument and you're making things up.
What part of the argument did I lose?
You said that I predicted a civil war would happen at a period.
No, I'm saying that you talk about it constantly. Right. And I have not.
What was I wrong about?
I haven't seen any of the evidence of this.
Summer of Love is...
What he's wrong about is no civil war happens. I suppose if, a civil war happens 50 years from now and Tim Pool has been cryogenically frozen or something like that, or 100 years from now or whatever, and is still around, then he could be like, haha, I was right, there was a civil war. But what evidence is there of any real impending civil war? And so what little I know about Andrew Wilson, I'm sure there's a whole lot that I disagree with this guy on, but to me, he's correct here with what he's doing and calling out Tim Pool, because Tim Pool is just a moron who has been hung up on this Civil War thing. We're not having a Civil War anytime soon. That's my prediction. Even, no matter what happens with this election, we're not having a Civil War. But that's just my opinion. That's my view. What do you think about this exchange between Andrew Wilson and Tim Pool? Do you think there's a Civil War right around the corner like Tim Pool does? Or do you agree with Andrew Wilson that Tim Pool just seems to be full of it? Let me know in the comments what you think about Andrew Wilson, Tim Pool, any of these other right-wing figures, or anything else that you want to comment on. Make sure to give me a like and subscribe. That helps me to grow the channel. I'm growing quickly and I want to keep growing so I can bring out more content like this. This is Chris on Culture. I will see you in the next video.